The Old Testament reading is from Isaiah, verses 1 through chapter 58, verses 1 through 12. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask me of righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interest on your fast days and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I chose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I chose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom shall be like noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall rise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. The New Testament reading is from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. A little bit more than Tom read. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel, but on the lampstand, and gives the light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law, until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of all the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Here ends the readings.
Isaiah 58 ought to make us feel very, very uncomfortable. If we take the time to read it to our hearts, we ought to be feeling a little disturbed right now. Isaiah 58 doesn't pull any punches. Isaiah 58 essentially says we're nowhere near doing what God would have us do. Biblical scholars tell us that Isaiah 58 actually is from the author known to them as the third Isaiah. They can tell if you read through the book of Isaiah that there's several different authors. They know it just from writing styles, but they also know it because the book of Isaiah covers 250 years of Jewish history. and there ain't one guy that's going to cover that. At the end, God says to be about the healing of the breach. The healing of the breach. There's a couple ways that could be interpreted. Isaiah 58 finds the Jewish people back in their homeland after the Babylonian destruction. The Babylonians conquered them, destroyed the temple, took the leaders away into captivity, and now the people have finally returned because the Assyrians have gone and destroyed Babylon. But instead of progressing, the people are just what the people always are. They think they do what God would have them do, which is to sacrifice something, offer that up to God, and then go about their lives. And Isaiah 58 says, you don't understand. This is not the fast that I want. This has nothing to do with how I would have you live. You need to change. You need to change. 250 years into Isaiah, and the people still are not living as God would have them live, and valuing each other as God would have them value each other. 2,000 years into Christianity, we're still not living as God would have us live. We're not valuing as God would have us value God's creation. And in fact, we are at the cusp. We are at the cusp of absolutely destroying God's good creation. Something's got to change. You've got war drums beating across the globe, ready to unleash the worst destruction of God's creation possible. We've got ecological damage going on that just escapes the mind. When I first took on this ministry of raising people of faith awareness to destruction of God's good creation, I used to present 300, 400 different slides so that people could see what was coming, what was happening, and how we were destroying God's good creation. I don't do that anymore because if you want to know, all you got to do is look up and look out, and you'll see that we're destroying God's good creation. The signs are overwhelming. We really got to play blind, dumb, and indifferent to avoid them. And the amazing, stunning growth in economic disparity is just unfathomable. Where you can have a dozen guys, and it's primarily guys, who have more wealth than 4 billion people. There is no way that is sustainable. There is absolutely no way that it is sustainable. And so what happens between the violence and the ecological destruction and the economic disparity? What do you have? Well, your first sign of it is go look at the border. People can no longer live where for centuries they have lived. And it's all intertwined. If we took away our disregard for how we treat Earth and the life systems on Earth, we would still have the economic disparity. If we took away the economic disparity, we would still have the inclination to war because we want what you have and you want what I have, and we're going to do whatever is necessary in order to do it, or just because I don't like you. And in the midst of this, God in Isaiah says, you think this is how I would have you live? Walter Brueggemann, who is the closest thing that the United Church of Christ has to a prophet, the Old Testament prophet. He's a fantastic Old Testament scholar. He says the church in this time has three urgent tasks. The first one is to confront society with the truth. To confront society, the greater society, in fact, all of us and everybody we know and all the people we don't know, with the truth that the path we're on is going to destroy us all. And once you confront society with the truth, then the next urgent task is to guide them through the grief that results. Because once you accept the truth, you just got to be sad. You just got to be depressed. You just got to wonder, is there any purpose to life? And so the second urgent task is to guide people through that grief so that they can see there is yet still possible. And the third stage is to bring them to hope. Because if we don't have hope, if we just wallow in despair, we won't make the necessary changes. We won't do anything that Isaiah is calling us to do. So rather than tackling all three tasks today, I just want to talk about our call to truth. The unique qualifications of a faith community, of people of faith, is we hold that there are inherent truths. There are truths because God has told us there are truths. And our responsibility is not to contain that within ourselves or even within these walls. Our responsibility is to bring that truth out, not to evangelize, not to bring in more to the collection plate, but to save God's good creation. How do we do that? We do that through a combination of really big, medium, and what looks like tiny steps, but what might be the most important steps of all that we all get involved in. And we all have to choose, where are we at that we might be willing to do this? So in terms of environmental destruction, if you're interested, you go to my website and there's 48 different action steps that you can take. 48? Yeah, don't worry about it. Choose one and do it. But what's important is to let that be a public demonstration. Right? In my ministry, on a big scale, I've participated in a number of demonstrations, mass groupings, and occasionally upon arrest. Right? You don't have to do that. If you're called to do it, then by all means do it, but you don't have to do that. On a personal basis, you could just consume less. Right? Last year, we moved to a duplex out of a condo. We moved to a duplex in a senior community. And once again, we had to shed our possessions. Now, I've done this several times, and each time I've done it, I swore I would never accumulate again. And yet, when I go to move, there's all that stuff that somehow just magically appears. And I don't believe in holding it for the kids. Right? They don't want it. And so you got to get back to the basic question, well, why did I get it? What prompted me to think I needed to have that possession, which now lies gathering dust on the third shelf in the garage, and I had to put in multi-shelves to hold all this stuff, even though I've downsized 3 times. So if you want to do something, resist buying something. Resist the urge. Now, you're up against strong odds because there's a huge amount of propaganda that gets you to buy something. We have a huge marketing industry that's all devoted to making you think that if you don't buy this thing, whatever this thing happens to be, you will never know joy in your life again. You've got to have this. You've got to have it. And what happens? We get it. And we're not happy. So we must have bought the wrong thing. And what's the answer? Buy something else. There is one radical step in my 48th which says, stop buying Christmas presents. Yeah, I know that's shocking. And the wife and I haven't, and we don't do it to the kids. Although I have yet to convince my wife that we don't do it for grandkids or the great-grandkids. That's another step. But you got to think about the irony. Think about the irony. We're supposedly honoring the greatest gift of all, which is the birth of Jesus into this world. And how do we honor the birth of Jesus into the world? Is we then clutter up the world with more stuff. Okay, don't want to do that? Here's a small step. There's a guy in my neighborhood that takes a walk every day, which is not unusual because seniors, we got to get out and walk or we're not going to be able to move again, all right? But what he does on his walk is he takes along a picking stick and a bag. And on his walk, he picks up litter on his walk. St. Francis says, preach the gospel, the good news, always, and when necessary, you can even use words. But preferably, do it with your life path. So this gentleman, going around the entire neighborhood, picking up trash that is not his, is a visible sign of the gospel. Something small you can do. We've got all these people that Texas is trying to make war with, not accepting that they're children of God in desperate need of somewhere where they can live, where their kids can live. And so Texas' answer, cheered on by a whole bunch of other people, is we're going to put barbed wires so they can drown. Or if they do make it across and they don't die of thirst in the desert, we're going to pack them up and we're going to ship them up north. Because all those people up north claim they're hospitable to these people. And we'll show, when we ship them up north, that all of them northerners aren't really hospitable. They're only hospitable in thought while they're in the south. You bring them up north, and everybody says, we don't want them here. And somewhere along the way, we forget that they're children of God. Somewhere along the way, we forget that God treasures them as much as God treasures us. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break every yoke? If in our destruction of the environment, we have made it intolerable for people to live where they live, who are we to say they can't go where their kids might be able to live? I mean, would you sit there and watch your kids or your grandchildren starve? Or would you move heaven and earth to get to a place where they might have a future? The problem of mass migration, and I got to tell you, this is just a start. You have to go and ask why. You have to search out what are the reasons that are causing people to uplift themselves from where they have lived for centuries and risk their lives, risk their very lives and their children's lives to go to another land where there's the possibility that their kids might not only live, they might actually prosper. And I give you a hint. It isn't because they want to mow our lawns. I've gone on immersion experiences in Central America to try and understand why are people willing to undertake such a hazardous journey? And the answer is, they have no alternative. Even without our destruction of the environment, There's the economic inequality, which has become so huge that we have sucked out the resources from where everyone else lives. And we pretend not to notice. When I was in Colombia, we were called in, I was a member of a Christian peacemaker team, we were called in to be in a mining village between the Colombian army and the miners, because the miners were afraid the Colombian army was there to take them off the land. Because land records in a lot of Central America are really who possesses the land at the time, right? And so if the army moves off the people who inhabit that piece of land, then the land's available. And somebody else can take it over, such as a rich corporation. This is, by the way, how we get cheap bananas. We've owned up to it. In the 60s and the 70s, we hired paramilitary armies to move off people so that we could harvest their land. And then the violence. The violence that's imbued because we have such a drug problem here that we make it so rewarding for criminals to grow our drugs that are willing to kill anybody that gets in their way. That mining village was artisan gold miners. They harvested dust. You had to dig out lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of dirt, put it with a little bit of mercury, which attracts the gold dust, and then you could refine it. The only reason it's worth doing it is because we're willing to pay some ridiculous amount of money for a little bit of gold. And so people get exposed to mercury, heavy metals. Their water systems get poisoned. The land that they grow their food on becomes poisoned. Their children are raised with mercury in their bloods. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? That is a challenge. That is a challenge. Let's accept that it's a very rare person that's going to bring homeless into their house. But does that mean that if we escalate that, we deny the homeless the possibility of having a roof over their heads, protection from the cold? Remember those subarctic temperatures we were experiencing? You know, the 10 below zero, the 15 below zero. The city of Aurora opens up warming shelters when that happens. I don't know if Naperville does it or not. Right? So the homeless have a possibility to not die. Only they closed it because they were having violent problems at the warming center. But what they would do is they would send them to the Central Methodist Church. The city's homeless warming shelter couldn't stay in existence because of violence, but sent them to the Methodists. And the Methodists say, hey, we didn't have a problem with violence. Why? Well, because we fed them. And we treated them like human beings. Treat them like children of God. So, big action for hunger? Lobby the government. Medium action for hunger? Participate in a food pantry. When I first became a minister, I served two churches at the same time. They were called a yoke community. And at the one church, we started up a food pantry. And at the other church, we started up a weekly community meal where no questions asked, whoever you were, you're welcome to come. Now these are little churches, and they couldn't handle this all by themselves, and so what the idea was for the weekly community meal is we got together with 4 other churches, and every week it'd be a different church. They would use our facility because to go through the regulations of getting a kitchen certified so that you could serve in the public took a little bit of doing, but everybody has a spot in their heart if you're willing to serve. These really good people, I tell you, I tear up when I think about them. Every time they would come, they'd cook and prepare the meal, and then they would serve it. Still, would eat their own meal in the kitchen. It took a lot for me to finally get them to come out and sit with the other people and join together. That's how you know that you're recognizing each other as children of God, is you break bread together. You have communion. When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide from your own kin, then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Healing the breach. In Isaiah's time, every city was walled to protect themselves from invaders. And you breached the wall, then your defense was gone. And that's how you lost everything. But the breach Isaiah is talking about is not the breach of a physical structure. It's the breach of a relationship between us and God. And how do you heal that breach? You act. Maybe little steps before you get bigger. But you act. In 2024, the majority of Americans no longer hold that faith communities are relevant to life. Faith communities are no longer have a relevance in modern life. Why? Well, maybe they can't see any difference between how we live and how anybody else lives. So we got to get out from underneath that bushel basket. We got to break out this light. We got to do it by our actions. We got to be visible gospel. We've got to oppose violence and war. We've got to oppose the economic disparity that says it's perfectly all right that in a couple years we're going to have our first trillionaire while billions starve. We got to get vocal and say, that's not how God would have us live. We got to start caring for God's good creation. If not for us, then for our grandkids. Preach the gospel always. And when necessary, use words. But first and foremost, do it with your feet and with your hands and with your hug. This day and all days. Amen.